Hi and welcome to this edition of Back in History. I do hope you're doing fine. In this edition, we briefly discuss the partitioning of Africa by European forces as part of their colonialization of the African continent. Africa has always been a vast territory with huge mineral resources in almost every part of the continent. So it became a location of attraction and more of a beautiful bride for the European forces. Merchants began to move into the continent through the sea routes and settled mostly in the coastal areas where you have the sea, the vast oceans, and so on. So as at the 15th century, several European countries had their presence or settlement in most parts of Africa and had engaged actively in commerce with the local people. What then happened was that the interest of the European forces began to conflict in some areas. The idea then arose to call for a conference in Berlin, Germany, to discuss the need to partition Africa among the European forces so as to avoid a violent clash of interest among the forces. So the meeting was held in 1884 in Berlin, Germany, at the instance of the then German Chancellor Bismarck. The agenda for the meeting was to discuss and settle how European countries would claim territories in Africa to avoid conflict and the outbreak of war among the European countries. And all the major European states were invited to the conference. Germany, France, Great Britain, Netherlands, Portugal, Belgium, Spain were all invited. Denmark, Italy, Turkey, and Russia were also invited to take part in the discussion for partitioning of Africa. The United States of America was also invited, owing to its then interest in Libya. But the US was not interested in having a permanent colonial interest in the continent of Africa and therefore did not attend the Berlin Conference. It is important to note that no African was invited to the conference. Neither were the African people aware of what was being discussed against their territory by the European forces. In other words, the native African people had no say whatsoever in the partitioning of their land to European forces. It has been reported that the partitioning was done by the display of the map of Africa on the wall in a room occupied by the competing European interest. So it was more of a point and take kind of situation where each representative simply pointed at the location he considered dear to his country, and the location was given to such representative subject to some deliberations. In the end, the countries in Africa were partitioned as follows: Algeria, Morocco, Tunisia, French Equatorial Africa, and Madagascar were given to France. And that is why most of these countries are French-speaking countries till today. Libya, Eritrea, and Somaliland were given to Italy. Tanganyika and the Congo were given to Belgium. Angola, Zambezi, and a part of Madagascar were given to Portugal. The Gold Coast, now Ghana, Sierra Leone, the Gambia, Nigeria, Sudan, Egypt, British Somaliland, Uganda, British East Africa, Rhodesia, and South Africa were taken by Great Britain. Some portions of Africa were also taken by Spain, being a major colonial imperialist at the time in Africa. The countries so mentioned remained under the colonial dominance of the European forces for several years to come and the vast mineral resources of the continent were exploited non-stop and exported through the sea to factories in Europe. Now, at the conference, the modality for ownership of the territories was set, and one of the modalities agreed upon was that, quote, each European country that claimed possession over a part of Africa must bring civilization in the form of Christianity and trade to such territory. End of quote. African traditional rulers were made to sign documents to signify their acceptance of the occupation of their territories by the European forces. Any traditional ruler who refused to sign the agreement was either dethroned and made to become a commoner at home or banished to slave plantations abroad. Some native African entities resisted the occupation of their lands, but they were soon overpowered by the imperialist forces, who were obviously more sophisticated in weaponry and more prepared. Now, it is important to note that most of the national boundaries we have in Africa today are boundaries that were created in the course of the partitioning of Africa. Some of the boundaries were created arbitrarily, with little or no regard for similarity in the people's way of life, geography, and culture. Most of the conflicts for control of resources in Africa have been traced to the imbalances that were created by the partitioning of 1984. These countries later gained independence from the imperialist forces beginning from Ghana in 1957. So Ghana was the first country in Africa to gain independence from its colonial masters in 1957. This was followed by Nigeria in 1960 and followed by other countries as the years went by. Many thanks for watching this edition of Back in History, and do remember to share this video with your friends and subscribe to the channel for regular notifications.